Hey, Mr. Grow. This is my grandmother from my mother's side, and we are just talking about families and stuff. So, where did our family come from, and how do you know?
Okay, on my mother's side, which was a Johnson family, I have a recent genealogical book that details 9 generations who were descendants of Joshua Johnson. I really don't know his birth dates or any of that, but I have a copy of his will that was I guess the word would be probated in February of 1795.
Oh, wow.
And so it's very interesting. He bequeaths and gives one of his daughters a cow and a calf, and, and a lot of other funny stuff. But on both sides of my family, they were farmers in both my mother's side and my father's side. But it's very interesting to see all the names. It's quite a thick book, but it is generations. I don't have as much really about that side of the family, but I have a lot of more interesting information about my father's side of the family, which was the name Savage. I've learned some of this in trying to put this stuff together. I have a cousin who has put together some of this information over the years, and I did learn as I tried to come up with something for Amy. I did learn that the name is Savage is a Latin word that means a wood. And I did learn that the Savages came from England. And back in 1066, there was an Edric Savage listed in a book. And then it continues to go through other years up to 1379. And there was a poll tax roll. But the later thing that happened was Thomas Savage was the Jamestown colony's first Indian interpreter. And he came here from England at age 27, having arrived in England as a 13-year-old. And then it goes on to say how he prospered, but he died in 1633, so he was only over in this country for 12 years. But he was left as a hostage with Chief Powhatan to learn the language, customs, and ways of life of the Indians for purposes that would benefit the Jamestown colony. So I guess we have somebody in our family who's pretty famous.
Yeah, cool.
After all.
Okay, so we have also, how many generations can you trace back? And so you've kind of answered that with
the nine and this
nine,
and I think there are about 6 or 8 generations that
Okay.
are documented in the Savage family.
And then can you recall any names, places of birth, birthdays? So we've got
Well, I talked about Thomas Savage.
And this
and I talked about some other dates.
Okay.
Awesome. I don't think I have any. I do have a list of births and deaths from the Savage family Bible that my cousin, who's put together all this information, he has, and that's very interesting. My grandmother Savage had 4 children who died at birth or quite young, but I think she had a total of 12 children.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot of children. Okay, so do we have any veterans in our family?
We do. My cousin's information that he has put together on the Savage family indicates that there were family members who served back in the Revolutionary War and also in the Confederate War. As a matter of fact, he told me that there is documentation sufficient that women who in our family who are interested are eligible to be a member of the DAR and the Daughters of the Confederacy as well. And of course, my husband was a veteran. My dad was a veteran. My husband was in the Marines. My dad was in the Navy. My dad had a brother who served in World War I. My dad served in World War II.
Very nice. All right, so can you tell me any stories about our family?
Well, we have a lot of longevity on both sides of the family, and I guess the one who would be considered the greatest character in the group of family members would be my mother. Um, she grew up on a farm, and she was pretty much a tomboy, and she had three sisters. She had two sisters who were very prissy, and she was a tomboy, so she always agreed to work in the fields alongside the men if they would stay back and do the housework. So when she got married, she didn't know how to do any housework. But she quickly learned. But we did not know until she was 85 years old. She died at 98 and a half in 2014. We did not know till she was 85 that I knew that she had played a lot of basketball when she was in school, and did not know the story about how she came to play for so many years. She said that it suddenly dawned on me that she was almost 20 when she got married, and I know there were only 11 years of school back in those days. And so I questioned her about that, and she said she got drafted into high school when she was in the lower grades to play basketball. And so she loved it so much, she kept purposely failing one course each year so that she could go back the next year. And the school officials allowed that, so she ended up playing basketball in high school for 7 years.
Wow.
But what was so amazing was that we didn't know that for all those years, and she purposely didn't tell it. And we then chided her because she always pressed it upon us so much how important it was to study a lot and do well, and she kept purposely failing.
That's funny. Okay, so and then do we have any genealogical records?
Well,
and if so,
these that I have talked about today, my cousin has a lot of records that I didn't bring with me today, but then we have this large genealogy book, so I think we have pretty good records on both sides of the family to back up what I said.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Is kind of shallow because of my first recollection of my mother when I was 7 years old. For the first 7 years, I lived with my grandfather and grandmother in Greensboro. And my grandfather was some kind of employee with the town of Greensboro, in charge of the incinerator. I guess they burned trash all that back then. And his name was S.L. Welch. And my grandmother was a Cox. She was, and both came from the farm somewhere around Greensboro in Randolph County. And that's all I can remember about them. After 7 years, my sister and I, she's about 6 years older than I am, and I'm 78, we were shipped from Greensboro to Toledo, Ohio, on a train by ourselves. And that was my first grade teacher was Mr. Palmer in the first grade in Toledo, Ohio. And the street that we lived on was Ewing, E-W-I-N-G. So that was our first recollection of school and grandparents, and actually mother and a stepfather who I didn't know prior to her marriage to this man. My original name was Silman, and it's my understanding that I was a sick baby, and my father at that time was a Christian Scientist who did not believe in medicine or doctors or any of that. And so they say that I was in pretty bad shape and about to go away from here. At which time my uncle, Bob Welch, gave me a blood transfusion, my sister told me that he was lying in the bed beside me in a private home in Greensboro, giving me a blood transfusion, and that's how I survived.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of the stories that I did want to tell, because Bob Welch is the man that I love dearly, and he's over 100 years old now. He died. He was born in 1910. So those were the events of the early days, and so after that, we lived in Toledo, Ohio for probably 3 years, and I went to 3 different schools there. So we moved a lot. I don't know if my stepfather would rent a house and not pay the bill and be moved or not. I don't know what happened, but I know that I was in 3 schools in Toledo, Ohio. And then we were moved back to Nashville, Tennessee. All of us, mother, stepfather, sister, and me. And at that point in time in Nashville, my stepfather decided that he was a restaurateur, and so he must have leased a building and started a small restaurant on Gallatin Road in Nashville, Tennessee. All 4 of us worked, and I was in the 4th grade at this time. My father was the cook. My mother waited on behind at that time, back then they had a bar, and she was the waitress behind the bar. My sister waited on tables, and I was the curb boy, taking food out to cars and hanging the tray on the door of the car. And at 10 o'clock, I got off of work, and the rest of them closed up the restaurant, and I was supposed to go home next door. I didn't go home. I was in a gang of boys, and we roamed the road of Gallatin Road, and we were kind of a little gang. Anyway, to make a long story short, my mother felt like it would be best for me to be relocated. My Uncle Bob, who earlier had given me a blood transfusion, sent her a note that said, "Send him to me." He was in Williamston, North Carolina, and that's how I got to Williamston. Okay, and in Williamston, my Uncle Bob and his wife, Martha, made sure that I could pass school subjects. I didn't know anything about math. I didn't know much English, could not spell much, and barely could read. And as a result,
How old were you?
well, this is 4th grade, about what, 10 or 12?
Okay. Wow.
And so they worked on me and believed in me, and I graduated from high school thanks to them, and went to UNC Chapel Hill and finished there. After military service, I spent 3 years in the Marine Corps, and graduated from UNC at Chapel Hill, and married my best friend, Jess.
Oh.
So that's how it was in the early days for me.
Awesome.
Although I don't have much of a background, don't have many names or dates or anything like that, but that's something that maybe some of the family could find out. Okay?
Thank you.